Hey there, Confirmation students. Welcome to our second week of reading Manna and Mercy. So last week we started off talking about the beginning of God's story. The stories in the Bible, the first 11 chapters that shape how the rest of the story goes, that tell us who God is and how God is in the world. Today we're moving on to the next section. We're starting off with Genesis chapter 12, and we're moving through the stories in Genesis and Exodus. These are the stories that explain when people decided to stop listening to God's laws, when people decided to stop listening to how God wanted us to live, that this is how things turned out. So we have the big deals who have turned themselves into the system of oppression. Remember, we talked about big deals being the people who think that they're all that important and deserve more things, more money, more stuff, more attention than all the other people. And they do that by oppressing people. So when we oppress somebody, it means that we take away their ability to make decisions and have abundant, free lives. So in our chapter, God births a people. We start off by hearing about Pharaoh and Pharaoh's system of oppression. We have in our book the diagram that shows us the system of oppression. At the very bottom, we have slave labor. We have the slaves that are building up Pharaoh's kingdom. They are the people who aren't paid, who are forced to work, and who are barely given what they need to survive in life. Then above them we have the citizens and ordinary people. That would be people like you and I who are working day to day to make their money to put food on the table. Above that we have administrators and other big deals. These are the people kind of running the show. And above them we have the royal family, and at the very top we have Pharaoh. And Pharaoh in this system has created himself to be like a god for everybody else. And Pharaoh expects for everybody to worship him. So the big story that our chapter talks about is the story of the Exodus. Exodus is a word that means the way out. So what happened is, over many generations, God's chosen people, Abraham was a man that God chose, and he said, Abraham, you will be the father of all nations. All of your descendants will be my chosen people. And Abraham had Isaac, who had Jacob, whose name got changed to Israel. And then Jacob had 12 kids, 12 sons. And those 12 sons, one of those was Joseph. Joseph had his coat of multicolors, and he became the second in command for Pharaoh. Well, then many generations passed. And what ended up happening in those generations is that Egypt's Pharaoh turned the Israelites, God's people, Abraham's descendants, God's chosen ones, into the slaves in Egypt's world. In our Exodus story, in the story of the way out, was the Israelites who wanted to get out from under Pharaoh's hand. They wanted to go and live on their own as free people. They knew that they were God's chosen people and that God was on their side, and they wanted a way out. So Moses became the chosen leader. God chose Moses to go to the Pharaoh and ask Pharaoh to let them go. So Moses went to the Pharaoh and said, let my people go. And he had to go back over and over again, and God sent the 12 plagues to curse Israel to try and get the Pharaoh to finally agree to let them go. Pharaoh finally came around and let Moses and the Israelites leave Egypt. And so they left through the Red Sea. They got to the edge of the Red Sea, and Moses lifted up his staff, and the waters parted, and the Israelites all walked through the sea on dry land, getting to the other side. But Pharaoh at this point had changed his mind, and so he sent the armies out to go and capture those Israelites and bring them back to be slaves again. And so when all of the Israelites were safely on the other side of the sea, God sent the waves crashing down on the armies. And Pharaoh could no longer get the Israelites back. So as we live our lives today as Christians, this Egypt's system of oppression, where we have some big deals at the top who distribute some power to some middle people, and a bunch of citizens, ordinary people, and slaves at the bottom is the way that the world often likes to run itself. We can find many examples around our world, in our country, and probably even in our own town, of people who would prefer to be a big deal. And when you're a big deal, it always comes at oppressing somebody else. But as Christians, because we're part of God's chosen people, our challenge is always to live by God's rules, the way that God would want the world to work. In a world where you and I and our whole community get to live in a way that is filled with joy, that doesn't have war, doesn't have oppression, doesn't have greed, and teach the whole world to live this way of life. And we can do this because we trust that God will abundantly provide for us in all of the things that we need, and even more than what we need, because God provides in abundance. Abundance of food, clothing, resources, in all of creation, but also an abundance of grace, mercy, love, and forgiveness. So much so that we don't need to hoard what we have. We can share what we have for the sake of the whole world, so that each and every one of us gets to live this same life of abundance. It's tricky to do because the world so often likes to live in the system of oppression like Egypt is in. But our challenge is to fight that so that everybody can experience a life that is filled with joy. We'll see you next time for chapter 3. Bye.